Welcome to Inside Crime, the Experts. In this series, we'll bring you updates on what is making the news in crime from around the world. And now to our experts. Tim Watson-Munro is Australia's leading criminal psychologist. He's delved into the minds and crimes of some of the most notorious criminals in Australia and from around the globe. Dr. Xanthi Mallet is a world-renowned criminologist and Associate Professor of Criminology at the Central Queensland University. And I'm Duncan McNabb. I started my life of crime as a detective in policing, in major criminal defence and in the corporate sector before heading to the media as an investigative journalist, author and TV producer. First up, some news. 2025 marks some significant anniversaries in the crime world. In episode 3, we talked about Christopher Wilde, the Australian-US serial killer and sexual predator. He's the prime suspect for the Wanda Beach murders that happened 60 years ago this year, on the 11th of January 1965. Coming up, and we'll be talking about these anniversaries later in the year, it's 50 years in July since heiress and activist Juanita Nielsen disappeared and believed murdered. This incredibly brave woman took on corrupt businessmen, politicians and police. She's never been found, but the stories and rumours about her still swirl. And then there's notorious hitman Christopher Dale Flannery, better known as Mr. Reticle. Flannery disappeared 40 years ago in May 1985, and like Juanita, his body has never been found, but the stories and rumours abound even now. Flannery thrived in a time of drugs, thugs and stunning corruption. The notorious former copper, the late Roger Rogerson, probably took the secret of Flannery's demise to the grave when Rogerson died in 2024. Earlier this month marked 25 years since Catherine Knight committed her appalling crimes. On the 1st of March 2000, police went to a house in the hamlet of Aberdeen in the New South Wales Hunter Valley. Inside, they found a sight they will never erase from their minds. The sight was John Price, a worker at the local abattoir and partner of Catherine Knight. In the kitchen, they found his head and some vegetables in a stock pot. On the kitchen table, what appeared to be steaks. Mr. Price's body was in the lounge room and his skin hanging from a meat hook. He'd also been stabbed 37 times. The attack started when Mr. Price was in bed. There was no sign of hesitation in the attack or in the grisly aftermath. It was a crime so dark, evil and depraved, but as they later found, the work of someone sane. His wife, Catherine Knight, was also an abattoir worker and she was arrested. Knight later pleaded guilty and is in prison for life, never to be released, we hope. Now, on updates on other crimes, the story of the Beaumont children, Jane, 9, Anna, 7 and Grant, 5, who disappeared from Adelaide's Glenelg Beach on the 26th of January 1966, has been back in the news. The case attracted global attention when it happened. 3 little kids going missing is incredibly rare, and it's a time that robbed Australia of its innocence. The case remains unsolved and the kids haven't been found, but a few years ago a suspect emerged, the late Harry Phipps, a well-to-do businessman. Phipps owned a factory called Castalloy in North Plympton, not far from where the Beaumont kids went missing. Following evidence from 2 men that Phipps had them dig a hole the size of a grave at the factory in the days after the kids' disappearance, police did a small excavation at that site in 2013, but nothing was found. In 2017, Xanthi and I were part of a team that investigated the Beaumont disappearance for a documentary and discovered that the original dig site may have been in the wrong spot. A second dig, however, failed to reveal any new evidence. But this isn't a quest to give up on, and in late February 2025, a more extensive excavation was done at the now empty Castalloy site, getting it done before redevelopment. A week later, still nothing. But the hope and hunt for the Beaumont children doesn't end here, and great work to those people who just don't give up on this incredibly important story. Okay, on other cases from around the world, in Austria, the appalling Josef Fritzl, now 89 years old, who imprisoned and sexually assaulted his own daughter Elizabeth in the basement of the family home for 24 years, might be out of prison later this year. In 2009, he was given a life sentence for his long list of abhorrent crimes. Apparently, he's now suffering from dementia and psychiatrists reckon he's no longer a danger. According to his lawyer, Fritzl wants to be given a home that is close to transport. His lack of practice in driving has sapped his confidence. And with a straight face, the lawyer apparently said, he dreams every day of an apartment or house that must have a basement. Good luck with that. And so to the last piece of news, and it's a quirky story with ample scope for some quips. Back in 2019, five villains in the United Kingdom broke into Blenheim Palace. It's about 20 minutes from Oxford. And there they stole a golden toilet valued at almost £5 million. It was a fully functioning piece of conceptual art and plumbing called America. And when exhibited at the New York's Guggenheim Museum back in 2016, 100,000 people queued to use it. Prior to its theft, the Golden Toilet had only been at Blenheim Palace, Winston Churchill's family seat, for 2 days. Security wasn't high, and what followed was a ram raid. They quickly detached the dunny and fled through the fields. The toilet was later allegedly chopped up and sold for its weight in gold, probably just shy of 3 million UK pounds. While five were spotted on CCTV, only two of the alleged thieves and two allegedly involved with getting some cash for the criminal masterminds were arrested, and this was in 2023. One thief pleaded guilty, and the other three went to trial, which started in late February this year. At the trial, the judge told the jurors this was not a bog standard burglary. It was an audacious heist on one of the most famous palaces in this country. It was a bold and brazen burglary with great rewards for anyone who got away with it. Now, the jury has literally just come back, and they found one gentleman allegedly in plotting the disposal was not guilty, but the other two were convicted. Sentencing will be later this year. But who were the other three involved in the crime, and what happened to the golden toilet? This remains a mystery. And now to Tim and Xanthi for a bit of a chat about the news before we move on to the main story of the day, which is poisoning. Over to you.
Let's go back to the Beaumonts. This was literally the last ditch attempt to find them. So I watched with interest. It was privately funded, and unfortunately still no locations for those children. I don't think people are going to give up looking for those three children. If we'll ever know where they are, who knows?
We've discussed it many times during the course of our long friendship. I was wondering, without getting into either of your heads too much, but it's a case that's captured, I think, the collective imagination of Australians, and it continues to do so. We all want answers.
For me, it's been a lifelong thing. I'm the same age as Jane, for example.
Really? So
Yeah.
this is something that connects. You can imagine having been Jane at 9 in that kind of environment. That.
Yeah, well, we lived across the road from the beach as well.
Did you?
Yeah, and
South Australia or in Sydney?
In the glorious northern beaches of Sydney. But
It's wilder territory.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing, your parents say goodbye to you in the morning. You're 7 or 8 years old. You walk across the road to the beach. You spend the day there. You come back for lunch. If the weather starts turning foul, you come back early. Otherwise, you come back at sunset. Thousands of Australian kids did just that. And in fact, a lot of people these days judge Mrs. Beaumont unfairly, I think, through contemporary eyes. That was what it was like back in those days.
Well, even later too. I mean, I'm a little bit young, but when I used to go to Cornwall to spend time with my grandparents' house, so there were a group of kids, like some of them lived there, some of them were there during the holidays. We all knew each other. We used to go to the beach for the day, and there might be one or two parents with us. My parents wouldn't see me all day. They had no idea where I was. And that was just what life was like.
They were free and easy days. And I think the Beaumont kids and the Wanda Beach murders changed the psyche of parents in Australia at that time. And, I was an adolescent around about the time of the Wanda Beach murders. And, with the Beaumonts, it's just the never-ending story, isn't it? Lots of leads, lots of digs, lots of theories. And the poor parents died without ever knowing what happened.
Recently, the father died recently.
I remember the parents, one of the last things they ever said when they didn't give many interviews, but one of the things they said, because both of them had separated, their marriage had fallen apart, and they both lived, very reasonably close to each other. And I think Mrs. Beaumont said to someone that I knew, she said the reason they hadn't moved any further from where they were was because she always thought the kids might come home. And I think
that's heartbreaking, isn't it?
It's terrible.
They may. You can't go, and I've heard that before. And also the other thing, I don't know if you remember, Duncan, but when we did the dig in 2017, 18, whenever it was, and, some people were critical saying, wherever the kids are buried, leave them in peace. I got somebody emailed me that and I was like, didn't respond, but I thought, wherever they are, they're not in peace. But do you remember the dad contacted us via the police liaison and said, he was grateful that people cared enough to keep looking. And
Yeah.
I wish we'd been able to give him answers. Obviously, he's passed now. He passed, what, 2 years
2 years
ago?
ago.
Yeah, I want
Yeah.
to say. So,
Yeah.
it's we won't give up on those 3 children.
But one of the curiosities of that story too, the first bloke I spoke to when I went down to Adelaide to start having a look around was the original detective, Mostyn Matters.
Oh, yeah. Oh, he's
Really,
lovely.
a
He came
really
to the
young,
site. I remember
yeah,
Moz.
really
Yeah.
young copper on the day it happened.
Mm.
Still remembers it clearly, and
He
throughout.
took the missing report, didn't he?
Yeah, or
Yeah.
he was he just started as a detective, and he was at the station the night it happened, and they came in to report it missing. And he was always somewhat critical of the initial investigations, quite reasonably, and he never gave up helping the Beaumont family for his entire life. Remarkable old bloke, and as you said, he came to the dig just to see if he could be there, if he could assist with anything. It's just
Yeah, I
remarkable
remember.
to see these
He was
people
lovely.
still caring 60 years later.
Yeah.
And he had
In
to.
fact, he got quite emotional, if I remember rightly, at the dig site, didn't he?
He
He was
does,
like,
yeah.
he got quite caught up. He really, really wanted to see an outcome. And I remember that was really moving when I met him. Lovely guy.
A terrible strain on the old fella, but just an incredibly decent bloke. Just as a curiosity too, people, when you start talking about doing these excavations, there's often this a bizarre idea that you literally turn up with a shovel and off you go. But as
Took a
you're
year,
supervising, yeah, it
didn't
took a year to actually get someone to say yes. But the
it?
work you particularly were doing at the scene, ground penetrating radar.
Yeah, electral resistivity tomography. So for everyone who isn't a science nerd out there, geophysical techniques to look beneath the surface of the ground without actually digging.
And I think one of the reasons was spurred on at the location that we found, that initial investigation found that there were anomalies, and that's what spurred the rest of the work on as well.
And so what we found was basically exactly what had been reported by the 2 witnesses that you mentioned in the intro, was an area that was an anomaly. So we weren't looking for what people would imagine if they watch CSI as like a body laid out in the ground. Like, what we were looking for was something that was different from the surrounding area. And it was about 2 meters long by about 1 meter wide by about 2 meters deep. And that is the size of basically what you'd expect for a grave. Not necessarily a covert grave, though, distinction being, if somebody's going to be buried in a graveyard, that's kind of the size and that you'd expect, the scale. Most covert burials are around only about 0.5 meter deep because people do not spend the time digging 2 meters. But we found that, we excavated it. And I assume, although I don't know, I assume they did geophys on the site before they did the most recent dig.
Just as a curiosity, you're talking about, you got some fan mail as well while you were doing it. I spoke about it recently, and I got some fascinating fan mail, which one of the curiosities about cases like the Beaumonts, and it brings it, and something Tim probably knows better than most of us, is you get a lot of people trying to get a slice of the story. And the Beaumonts, for example, they had lots of people confessing to the crime. They had people purporting to be a Beaumont child who emerged out of nowhere years later.
Did they? I've not heard that
Oh
one.
yeah, there was allegedly Jane Beaumont, I think, was in Canberra at one stage. She was in New Zealand at one stage. It's complete rubbish. I also got some fairly unusual things. It was a conspiracy between high-ranking politicians, and one person demanded to know if I was in fact a member of the Freemasons. So the Beaumont story.
I've often wondered, Duncan. I've never had the courage to ask, but
yeah.
Let's shake on it next time, Tim.
Yeah, well, I want the secret handshake as well. Why should I be left out?
Exactly. I think you're perfectly entitled.
Yes.
Yeah.
The other case that brings all of, well, there are a few, Malat brings them all out of the woodwork, but also in terms of claiming to be Madeleine McCann. We regularly get people claiming to be Madeleine McCann.
Yeah, and I think it's more than just mischief there.
Oh, it definitely is more than just mischief,
quite,
yeah.
Nasty, cruel, psychopathic almost, in that, for a moment or two, it maybe gives false hope to the families of.
It does. It does give false hope to that family,
because
and that is cruel.
Yeah.
The one that really bothers me are the psychics, the clairvoyants that come out of the woodwork that always get involved in these high-profile cases, including the Beaumonts that happened.
Gerard Crozet.
Oh God, they drive me crazy because I've actually spoken to families who have been contacted by these individuals claiming to have information for them. And just like the Beaumonts not wanting to leave in case the kids come home, wanting to check out these people who claim to be these lost children, people follow up on it because they are desperate for it to be true. And that is the ultimate predatory behavior to me, taking advantage, because not one of them, and I challenge if they've ever come up with something and like useful, I'd love to know about it, because not one of them in my experience has ever said anything helpful, and they give false hope, and it is so cruel.
Well, Crozet was interesting in the Beaumont case. He was quite world famous, God knows how. But this is in early 1966. He's actually flown at a local businessman, not Harry Phipps, I hasten to add, thought, we're getting desperate. What can I do to help? I know, I'll bring out Mr. Crozet, the famous world psychic. Mr. Crozet is flown out from Holland. He arrives in Adelaide. One report has it that his greeting at the airport was far greater than the Beatles got.
Oh, come on.
Seriously, and he spends a couple of days traipsing around Adelaide with a media pack behind him. The Paul Beaumont family are thinking, well, we don't really believe him. I think they gave an interview about this. We don't really believe him, but, any hope is better than nothing. He took the police to a couple of spots, which were completely and utterly irrelevant. They had nothing to do with not one skerrick of use this man pulled. He put a check in his back pocket and flew back off to the Netherlands. Just absolutely extraordinary.
What about murder by poison? Back in the news in 2023, following the death of 3 people in Victoria's Gippsland, charging of Erin Patterson, who allegedly served them Beef Wellington made with death cap mushrooms. I guess we can't talk too much about that case. It's sub judice, and the trial starts shortly, but I'm interested in your perspective on it.
Yeah, the trial starts on a small quick plug. I'm actually writing a book on it. It is a bizarre case. It has attracted and maintains global interest. The small towns in Melbourne, in Victoria, where the main protagonist, living Leon Gartha, and 13 kilometres away in Corumburra, have suddenly become the focus of world attention, which must have an extraordinary impact on the locals, if nothing else.
They're not happy about that world attention.
They're not even remotely happy about it. Dangerous dark world to go into, but there are so many people gathering online to share their opinion, share their theories.
Well, is that the worry though? Yeah, given the case is ongoing, it is sub judice, people can be held to account for things they say online.
Is something the detail of which you do not delve into.
This will be a case with a very long time.
Oh, we've got years ahead of us in this case.
And at the moment,
I don't talk about it too much until then, I suspect. Yeah. But what about poison as a murder weapon? There's quite a few other cases that we can talk about.
And it's usually women.
It is. I'm just reading a bit of research the other day, which suggested that poison is the preferred weapon of female murderer, and asphyxiation is for a male.
Well, I actually think that kind of reflects the psyche of males and females, and potentially also the physical strength, because females tend to be more hands-off, the poison thing, whereas men seem to like it more up close and personal, the knives, the strangulation.
Yeah, so, the dominance thing?
Don't know. What do you think, Tim?
I think it's all of that. And I think the public is captivated by poisoning cases because, you go back to Shakespeare and Macbeth and all that sort of stuff. I remember there's a great movie years ago called Arsenic and Old Lace.
Yes.
You remember that film?
I do.
I take 1 teaspoonful of arsenic, then add half a teaspoonful of strychnine, and then just a pinch of cyanide.
Should have quite a kick.
The thing about poison, I think, it's so potentially accessible, easy to administer.
Not that we're advocating.
But it's impersonal. It's impersonal.
There are 2 very recent cases, and there was one in Brazil where a woman, Mora dos Anjos, managed to bump off, I think, 3 of her relatives using arsenic-laced flour in last year's Christmas cake. She murdered 3 and attempted another 3. She committed suicide a couple of weeks ago in her prison cell.
By poisoning, or how did she die?
The Brazilians haven't quite told anyone how she died yet, but they've confirmed that it was arsenic laced flour in the Christmas cake. And in investigating, this is one of the curious things I
There's
always
a
see.
certain flair, isn't it, right
Yeah,
there?
and it was and nicely decorated too, I might say. It's looking quite.
I know, I've seen a picture of it.
But another curious thing is that when the police actually dig into the very obvious case, they find that they think she may have bumped off her father-in-law. They exhumed his body and found out that it also had incredibly high levels of arsenic in it. So she may have been
That's
bumping off a few other
interesting.
relatives as well.
Obviously, found a method that works, got away with it, is empowered. The interesting thing for me about poison is how cruel it is. You know, somebody who's poisoned often suffers a prolonged, very painful death. So it tells you something about people who are willing to engage in this activity, that they are quite happy to watch their nearest and dearest suffer to that level. It's really kind of next level in terms of cruelty, some of this.
It's a weapon of choice in Russia, isn't it, for political opponents?
Yes.
Allegedly. Let's slot that in there. We never know who's listening.
If you can't get them close to a
Well,
window,
it does happen.
Yeah, or a set of stairs.
yeah. I mean, back in a century or two ago, it was far more common by the look of it that people were as a murder weapon or as a murder weapon that no one could actually pin down. So the death was just not marked as murder. Is it the dramatic improvements in forensic science and maybe,
Toxicology.
yeah, and possibly more astute government regulation as well that have reduced the possibility of poisoning people and getting away with it?
There's also other weapons involved these days, high-tech death, which probably didn't exist in the 18th and 19th century. I guess people used what was at their disposal then, poison, knives, muskets perhaps, but we've moved on in terms of more the murder business, haven't we?
A couple of cases too recently up in Thailand where they've gone back to the more traditional methods. This is one that fascinates me. A woman, and I've been practicing this, so a woman called Sararat Rangiswathaporn, mid-30s, she has been found guilty of murdering 14 friends using cyanide. She had a massive gambling habit. She'd befriend people who obviously have money, get as much as she could from them, sometimes only $5,000 or $6,000, and then bump them off using cyanide.
A new age Charles Sabrage, right?
I forgot about him. That's right. Yeah.
That can't just be for financial gain, though. You don't start murdering people with cyanide. There's got to be a behavioral condition going on there as well, that somebody would be willing to do that.
It's called being extremely bad without a conscience or remorse.
But not mad. They
Clearly
clearly know what they're
planning.
doing. Yeah. Premeditated. Yeah. Repetitive. That's that in your parlance, Tim, that's bad, not mad.
And once they're successful, they'll have another crack at the title and they keep going and keep going.
Like
Obviously,
the Brazilian case.
yeah, like
Potentially.
money's an incentive. If they were random people, it's hard to see that she would have hated them, but she obviously loved money and potentially the thrill of the kill. And I think for some individuals, as we know, with serial killers, it can become a bit of an addiction for them.
Which poses just the question in my mind, something Tim touched on earlier too. Is the grisly thing, poisoning gives you the opportunity to actually almost, in some cases, perhaps play the concerned relative or spouse or something or other, yet knowing fully well that you've administered something that is going to kill the person.
It's almost Munchausen, isn't it? You can be the stoic family member supporting them or whatever, and then having been the cause.
Yeah, and you literally sit there and watch them die.
Yeah.
And you know full well why they're dying, but you
don't offer any assistance. You don't offer any, you could probably, before it's too late, still tell the paramedics and hospital what the poison is. I mean, but then with a lot of these poisons, by that point, by the time you're symptomatic, it's too late anyway.
Yeah, basically things have started breaking down.
And organs have started literally shutting down,
What sort of mind finds that could get any pleasure out of that?
Watch it, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a crime of extreme and unpredictable violence. It's a calculated act from the day that you decide to do it, to acquire the poison, to administer it, and then sit there and watch the after effects. And then probably try and gloss over or fake your compassion. It's probably one of the most cruelest calculated crimes I could think of.
Yeah, it is particularly nasty. This is one favoured by women, which, you know, and we're used to kind of male violence, but of a very different type.
I suppose one curiosity that I have is in the last couple of years, we have seen some remarkable cases that have garnered world attention, and they are poisoning cases. Is there a resurgence?
On Cat Night, of course. There's a case that involved premeditated violence, cruelty. Your description of the crime scene makes my blood run cold. The deceased's head on a table. As I understand it, he was carved up and made into soup, and his children were invited around for dinner. No poisoning there, but a lot of violence, correct?
We spend a lot of time talking about male violence, but in some instances, women can be just as vicious and violent as males, Catherine Knight being quite an extreme case. But, you know, we do have the women that select poison, and that takes a certain kind of cold, as you say, Duncan, to kill somebody in such a premeditated, callous fashion, to watch as somebody dies a very painful death. So women can be an interesting study too when it comes to violent crime.
In gender and how they plan. The level of calculation as opposed to that sort of sudden violence.
Poisoning is not impulsive, is it?
No.
You think about the crime, you then have to acquire the poison, you then have to find the right moment to administer the poison, the right method of administering the poison. It's very different to picking up a knife and stabbing someone or shooting them.
Well, as an extension of that, women are more likely also to coerce someone else into performing the crime and the violent act for them. So in that sense, Tim, just what you're saying about poison, you know, planning it, getting the poison, administering it, they do the same thing, but the poison is a person. You know, I'm talking about the Black Widows. And so women have got these methods of being hands off, but just as vicious.
That's absolutely
but less of them, less women kill. Obviously, we know that, the stats say that. But when they do, they can certainly be as violent as males in a different way.
I've had a few Black Widow cases where the patsy has been the bloke. He's committed the crime, and then sometimes he gets killed as well by another patsy. Do you think that poisoning cases are on the increase? We're going to see more of this?
Purely anecdotal. We've had, in the last couple of years, some major poisoning cases from around the world. So it's unusual because normally, you know, my reading is bizarre at best. If everyone looked at my Google history, they'd probably be terrified.
Yeah, mine too.
It's just, you don't want to go into those dark places. But it would seem that we are getting more people using poison as a weapon to bump off not one, but a group of people as well. What's curious for me is the incidence of conspicuous poisonings has increased, but also I'm noticing that they always seem to be rather than just murdering one person, it's a murder of multiples.
If you use poison, but is that because you may start off and people may not die to start with? It's one of those techniques you probably have to practice because you need to give someone enough to kill them, but not be detected. There's a fine balance in poisoning someone and getting away with it. And I think we're getting better at detecting it too. So that might show a skew in the numbers that we are improving at identifying historical and current poisoning events.
And I suppose we just touched on a couple of seconds ago, one of the great tools that investigators now have is to pull up their internet search history to see whether or not there have been the people contemplating it, have been having a quick look, you know, how much to kill.
And our listeners will probably go, people wouldn't do that. But the amount of cases, we'll all have seen where it is exactly that in search history. How do I kill somebody with cyanide?
How do I dispose of a body?
How do I get rid of a body in acid in a bath?
The poison, go through a list perhaps to pick the poison you're thinking about using, recommended poisons, but then also dosages. For example, if your intended victim is 6'5" and built like a brick outhouse, you'll probably need a lot more than you would if you're going to poison a little old lady, for example, a frail little old lady.
And do you want to do it quick or do you want to do it slow?
Yeah.
You know, talking incremental, tiny amounts that build up in the system over time.
That's
very difficult to detect.
That very old-fashioned poison, well, not old-fashioned poison. It was quite common in I think Agatha Christie wrote about it in The Pale Horse, I think it was, where they used thallium, which is somewhat of a Victorian poison by the sound of
Read
it.
my mind.
Yeah, it's a poison that actually it lingers in the body, so you just keep increasing the dosage bit by bit. It's a residual poison. It builds up in intensity, but it has symptoms that are akin to other
mirrored by other things.
yeah. So
cause
the
of death
doctors
is
are treating them.
natural.
Yeah, the doctors are treating him for X, but they're actually being poisoned by Y.
And
That's
obviously toxicology didn't exist then to the extent it does now. So they couldn't have traced these minute substances in the body.
And I suppose my nasty mind also goes to the people who are under regular medical treatment for some very common and potentially fatal ailment who are bumped off by a poison instead. And there is no
of course, yeah.
little chance of an autopsy and a coronial inquest.
Yeah.
Is it Harold Shipman?
Yeah, Harold Shipman, the most prolific serial killer probably in modern history, killed any, couple of hundred people. I've seen Harold Shipman's body. So I've met Harold.
Oh.
Yeah, he was in the mortuary in Sheffield. Yeah, so his remains.
A colourful life you've led, Doctor.
Yeah, the only way I would want to have met Harold Shipman is I met his dead body once when I was in the mortuary. Yeah.
I think I'd be happy with that. I think that's the only way I'd like to meet Harold, unless he was in handcuffs in a courtroom about to be sent down for life.
Yeah, which he was, but they didn't exhume all of the bodies, and a lot of people died, and they still have I think he wasn't found that guilty of that many, like really, the scale of it is still unknown.
Yeah, and there's a bloke who targeted the vulnerable and also had
healthy though. Yeah. They were also, a lot of them were healthy people that just shouldn't have died.
And as a general practitioner, he could just write them off as a natural causes death. Thank you very much. No investigation.
So I've just looked him up. 31st of January 2000, Shipman was convicted of murdering 15 patients under his care, sentenced to life, obviously, whole life order, never getting out. He suicided in prison, incidentally. Estimated 284 potential victims over 30 years. 284 victims.
That's quite a lot of people, 10 a year, slightly less.
So after all this, can we perhaps come to the conclusion that it would seem that females are the deadlier of the species when it comes to poisoning?
Poisoning? I'll give you poisoning. Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so I suppose that age-old, I think it's probably Victorian in origins, that poison is a woman's weapon, is probably pretty much on the money.
Yeah, I'd agree with that in the cases that I've seen. Not exclusive, no, but yeah.
Thanks, Anthony and Tim. And thanks to everyone for watching Inside Crime, the Experts. We'll be back soon with some more stories. See you next time, and please like our channel and subscribe. Thanks.